Good afternoon. I want to go over the directions for the midterm. I'm sure it's hard to believe we're already at the midterm of the semester, but we're here, as you can tell, because I'm wearing a hat and I have a sweatshirt on with a hood since it's cold. And it got particularly cold out actually today as I was working. So what I'm going to do in this video is just briefly introduce the directions for the midterm, which you're working on for next week. So please make sure you've gone into Blackboard, go under the tab for readings and writing assignments. And there you're going to find not only the directions for the midterm, but also the readings for the second part. Now, my midterms serve two purposes. The first half always looks back at the first half of the semester. So in this particular case, as you've seen, if you've read the directions, you're going to pick one of the writers that we read so far, and you're going to write a letter to them. So that means you can pick from Mike Rose, it could be Toni Morrison, Susan Sontag. You could also pick from Alyssa Harrod or Evelyn Glennie, who are the writers that we've done so far to this point in the semester. So your goal is to write to them and to ask them for some writing advice. And in the directions for the first part of the midterm, I've outlined how to do that. So I'm going to use my screen share. I'm going to flip over to that now and just give you a kind of a quick overview of how this works and also what's on the second part of it. The second part looks forward to the second half of the semester. So the part on the poets, on Gwendolyn Brooks, on Sandra Cisneros, and on Jamila Woods, that is all material that we're going to look at for paper number 4. So the second part of the midterm looks forward, while this first part looks backward to the first half of the semester. The end of the semester is going to have a very similar kind of final where you're looking back at a previous paper, and then you're also giving some reflections on it. So let me do a screen share here. I'm going to show you these directions. If you want to open them up and follow along with me, you're welcome to do that. I'll do another video this week, by the way, where I talk more in detail about those poets, although we're also going to be working on them after the midterm. So we're going to have plenty of time to think about the poets and to discuss them. And you're really just writing a quick response to them as the second part of this midterm, again, as a bit of a preview for what we're going to do with paper number 4. But anyway, let me show you the first part of these directions. As always, if you do have any questions on this, you're welcome to ask me, send me an email, and I'll be happy to talk with you or to give you suggestions. But let me go to my docs here, and I'll show you some of these details. So here I am on the directions. One thing I should mention is that when you send this to me next week, send me both parts together. You don't send me section 1 separately from section 2. Just label them. It's easier for me to keep track of. It's also probably easier for you to work on it. You can even go back and forth from one section to the other as you're working. So just put these in one Word file or Google Doc or whatever it is that you've been using to this point in the semester. So first thing to keep in mind is that this is a letter, so it should follow that format. So that means it needs to have the date at the top and then a salutation. So whether that's dear Ms. Glennie or dear Mr. Rose, whichever person you're writing to, that should be how you start off the letter. And I will post a sample later this week on Blackboard just so that you can see this. I'm sure you've all written letters before, so you know the basic format, but I'll show you one, or I'll put a basic sample one up on Blackboard so you can take a look. But keep in mind that you're picking one of the writers, and once you've determined which of the writers you're going to choose, then you're doing the following. So there's 4 paragraphs for this. And I've basically given you the outline for this on the directions themselves. So you're going to have a first paragraph in which you introduce yourself. So who are you? What are you studying? Why are you at Harper College? Remember, you're introducing yourself to Toni Morrison or Mike Rose or Susan Sontag or Glennie or Harrod. So they need to know who you are. We're not going to mail these letters, by the way. I mean, you can if you want to, but again, we're not going to send these off to these writers. We'd have to find their addresses in order to do that anyway. So you just have that introduction. Who are you? What are you working on? And you can also give a hint as to what kind of advice are you looking for. You're asking this professional writer for some advice on how they do what they do. So you want to give a little bit of a hint of that. And that's something that you'll notice I've been encouraging you to do throughout the first 3 papers this semester. Is the introduction really should preview what's going to happen in the rest of the paper. And the more specific you are about that, the stronger your introduction is going to be, even in something like this that's a letter, which I know is slightly different than the papers we've done so far. So in your second paragraph, this is where you're going to go back and look at the paper you did that fit and responded to these writers. So let's say you were going to write to Susan Sontag. In your second paragraph, you should explain what your paper for her was about. That was paper number 2. So in that paragraph, you can say, here's what I wrote about based on your work. Here's how it went. These were the good things about it. These were the things that I think needed improvement. So you're basically rethinking that paper. You're going back to it, looking at it, seeing what worked and what didn't work. And remember, later in the semester, you are going to have an opportunity to revise one of these earlier papers. So this is a good exercise here at the midterm to go back and look at how you've done so far. It will also give you some ideas on what things you might need to improve on in the second half of the semester. So that's the purpose, not only of this assignment, but particularly of that paragraph. It is asking you to go back, look at my comments, if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, to look at the suggestions that I gave you in these previous papers. Now, in your third paragraph, this is where I want you to go back and look at the piece of writing itself. So if in the second paragraph, you're looking at your paper, in the third paragraph of this letter, you're going to look again at, maybe Susan Sontag's essay, and I want you to pick 1 or 2 lines, maybe a whole paragraph that you think is particularly well written. What do you think is really effective? What do you think in the essay that you're discussing and whose author you are writing to, what section do you think was really well done? And in that part of your letter, you can say, well, here is a paragraph I thought was well done. How did you do that? How did you put this together? So that allows you also to reflect on your response to these readings. And it also encourages you to go back and to look at them again a little bit more critically. Okay. Now in your closing paragraph, as with any other letter, you want to have a nice, polite closer, something that pulls everything together. And what I'd ask you to do in that last paragraph is to ask for a very specific piece of advice. As you start looking forward to the second half of the semester and to the papers we're going to write in the second half, what advice would you ask of this professional writer? What do you want to do better? What do you want to improve upon in the second half of the semester with your writing? And what do you want to improve upon as you go forward and start thinking about perhaps taking English 102 in the spring semester? So that's your closing paragraph. Now, everything that I just mentioned, as you can see, is already mapped out here on your directions. So that's why I mentioned, please read them over, as I've encouraged you to do all semester. Reading the directions is, well, to paraphrase the old G.I. Joe cartoons, that's half the battle. If you get a sense of what the directions are asking you, chances are you're going to do better on the paper or on any assignment that you're being asked to complete. And I think that's the case here as well. So that's the first part, right? Now, again, you're doing all this at home, so you don't have to send this to me separately. You do part 1 whenever it is you've scheduled that during your day or your week to finish it, and then you get on to part 2. Now, part 2 looks forward. Okay, so this is something that's previewing the readings we're going to do in the second half of the semester, or some of the readings anyway. So for paper number 4, we're going to take a closer look, for example, at these writers. Notice they're all Chicago writers. So we've got Jamila Woods, we've got Sandra Cisneros, and we've got Gwendolyn Brooks. In fact, I even have some links here to some of Jamila Woods's readings of her poem, and also to some of her other poems, other than the ones that I have up on Blackboard. So you can follow that link and read those for yourself. And you can also listen to her reading some of her work and watch her as she presents it. So after you've read the poem, and it's linked here. It's called Daddy Doesn't. So just to kind of give you an example, since I've got the screen open, if you click on the link, it's going to take you to the poem. So this is the one you're reading for part 2 of your midterm. So just take that link, it'll take you over there. And again, this link will take you to YouTube. And if you skip ahead a little bit, you can hear Jamila Woods actually reading the poem itself. And I've got on the directions here, you can see that I've got listed the 3:43 mark is where you want to be in the video if you want to skip some of the other stuff that she says and you want to hear her reading and presenting this poem to this audience, right? So here's what I want you to do for the second half. You're going to write a response to the poem, and I've mapped out how I want you to respond to it. You're going to do 2 paragraphs. Now remember, they should be complete paragraphs of 6 to 7 sentences, so make sure you're doing that and you're writing full paragraphs here. So there should be 2 of them. And in the paragraphs, here's what I want you to touch on. It doesn't matter what order you put these in, so it's really up to you how you want to answer these questions, but it should be in 2 paragraphs. So how does Woods use humor to get her ideas across in the poem? It's a very funny poem. I hope you enjoy it. She uses a lot of humor to describe herself when she was younger, as well as her dad and the work that he had to do. In the poem, we learn about her dad, so I want you to see if you can figure out what kind of work he does. It's pretty obvious as you read it, but you may want to read it slowly to kind of pick up on the clues that she's giving you. And then lastly, how do you think she feels about her dad? So that's a level of interpretation. So what do you get from the poem? And having read it, what kind of ideas or feelings do you think she's trying to get across to you as the reader? Now, again, As I say with every paper, do not look up other information on Jamila Woods. I'm not interested in having you cite other sources or quote from other sources, or, as I've said before, do not copy other sources on Jamila Woods. I want your opinion on her. I don't want some material that you found on some website about her. I want to know what your thoughts were. If you're having any trouble as a reader, send me an email and I'll be happy to talk with you more about the poems. And as I said, I'll do another video this week anyway, where I discuss them. But you're really doing a response. Now, eventually what's going to happen, and you can probably already guess what's going to come up next, is in paper number 4, we're going to build on some of this. So we're going to take some of these poems and we're going to write about them and respond to them a little bit. But we'll get to that later on. We're doing the midterm now. But just to kind of give you an idea of why this is in here, it's a preview again for that second half of the semester, and the paper we'll do right after we do the midterm. So let me just stop doing the screen share and sum up a little bit. So again, read those directions over. The reading for this week is not just the directions, but also those poems. So up on Blackboard, you're going to see that you've got more Jamila Woods poems. You've got the Gwendolyn Brooks and the Cisneros. There are some review questions in the Cisneros and the Gwendolyn Brooks. As we did with paper number 1 and Mike Rose, you don't have to answer those. Those are optional. They're just there to help you get your ideas together, especially as you're starting to think about writing poetry. So they're just there as kind of review questions, and they'll come in handy actually too with paper number 4, as I mentioned. Now, I hope you enjoy reading this material, because again, it allows you to do 2 things. You're going to go back and reflect on what we did in the first half of the semester, and then you're also looking forward to this second part and with these poems, which I hope you enjoy. Again, they're Chicago-based. They're all Chicago writers, and so hopefully you'll see references in there that resonate with your experience. Even if you only come to the city occasionally, you're still from the greater Chicago area. So hopefully you'll see some elements in there that you find interesting. And again, that'll be a good preview for some of the other writers we're going to do in the second half of the semester, like John Porcellino, who's also a memoir writer and a poet himself, and is from Hoffman Estates, actually, as you're going to see in some of the reading of his that we're going to do in November. So to sum up this little video, please read those directions. Go on Blackboard. If you haven't already done so, read the directions for the midterm that's due next week. Take a look at the readings, read those over. In the next video that I do this week, I'm going to talk a little bit about those poems. And I'm also going to go over some grammatical issues that I've noticed coming up now that we're taking a bit of a pause here, looking back at the first half of the semester in these papers and reflecting on them. I also want to mention some structural things, some grammatical things that I'll do in a video this week, so you can kind of think about how to make certain corrections. I've done that at the paper level, so when you get my papers back and I've given you comments on them, you can see the corrections that I've made on them in the margins and at the end of the paper. Hopefully you've been able to see those. If you haven't, please email me, because every paper that you turn in, I've written all kinds of comments on them. So hopefully you've been able to read those comments. And a lot of you have asked me very good questions about them. So I keep encouraging you to do that, because that's how you'll improve as a writer. It also lets me know what I need to help you on, okay, as we go forward into the second half of the semester. So anyway, read those directions over. I hope you enjoy the poems. Hopefully they'll give you something to look forward to reading this week as we kind of get further into these fall-like temperatures. I hope they also bring you a little joy. There's a lot of, as I mentioned, I think with Harad and her essay, these poems also talk about some serious issues in some cases, but they also really try to find some hope and some optimism. So they're really beautiful pieces, and I hope you enjoy them as you read them over. Email me if you have any questions. In the next video, I'll talk a little bit more about these poems, and I'll also talk a little bit more about some grammatical and structural issues that I've noticed coming up in this first half of the semester. So I'll talk to you then. See you later.